And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network, well, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the original, the mothership, at coalitionradio.us. From Coalition Radio 1.0 and 2.0, where 6 years of interviews are stored for your listening and then ultimately viewing pleasure. In fact, one of our guests tonight has appeared on virtually every version of the Coalition Radio. Well, here in La La Land, a.k.a. Rhode Island, it was another crazy adventure, as we all got to witness, in my personal opinion, stupid government tricks at work. However, there remains, if you will, bright lights on the horizon. We are blessed here in Rhode Island with not only a phenomenal place to live, not only with a beautiful place to live, with a citizenry that is dedicated to, in almost a cult-like manner, ensuring a quality of life for fellow Rhode Islanders that I believe, having been pretty well traveled, is unparalleled here around the country. Our dining institutions, our natural beauty, places like Burrowville, Block Island, South County, the East Bay, the wilds of the West Bay and Western Rhode Island. When things get back to normal, well, the city lights of Providence, the culture, the universities, and, of course, the politics. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We've got a very special show. Joining us live for the first time in a little bit is Representative Blake Filippi. He is, of course, the Republican House Minority Leader here in the state of Rhode Island, your House of Representatives. He represents House District 36, which includes Block Island, Charlestown, and, well, that place called South County. Also joining me for the first segment of this show is someone who's been no stranger to the show over the last few weeks. Of course, I'm talking about Dave Levesque. He is the proprietor of, if you will, of Brood Awakenings. With 5 locations around Rhode Island, he continues, despite the best efforts, seemingly, of the government that rules here, to deliver high-quality coffee, drinks, lunch, incredible pastries to all of us in Rhode Island, and has done so throughout the entire duration of this plague. We're here, of course, to talk about, well, Rhode Island politics, which at times can be almost like a sport. We follow it in Rhode Island as if it was our own professional football team, baseball team, hockey team, all wrapped up into one. And we usually do so with a mixture of gallows humor, bemusement, a healthy dose of cynicism, and sometimes outright hilarity. This, however, is not one of those times. This state, despite the best efforts sometimes of the individuals who run it, has managed to survive, if you will, so far, one of the challenges of our lifetime, the event of our lifetime. And, of course, I'm talking about the COVID-19 plague, as we call it here in the Coalition. And the business community, despite the ups, the downs, the closures, the pauses, the purges, the near weekly, if you will, changes in direction, the fantasies of our leaders, all of that, they've stayed resolute. The core of the business community in this state is, of course, tourism, and, well, sadly, the state itself. Tourism and our universities remain if you will, one of the few dominant factors that are privately owned, privately run, privately managed in Rhode Island. But as we've talked over the last few days, we face a crisis here in Rhode Island. And so I brought Dave back on so Dave, Blake, and I can have just a little bit of a conversation. Then we're going to spend a bit of time with Blake himself to go over, well, all the other challenges that are facing Rhode Island. We remain resolute. We are a state with amazing people and amazing talents. We will overcome this, but we need to do it together, and we need to do it in an environment that is based on facts, science, information, and a healthy dose, if you will, of reality. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you both for joining me on a week that's been a lot of hard work for a lot of people, both of you. Blake, you are in the depths, if you will, of a legislative session like no other. And Dave, of course, you are a member of that dreaded private sector that creates wealth, employs people, and essentially really runs the state. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So Blake, of course, comes from a legal background as well as a business background. Sort of a Renaissance guy. He's himself involved in the hospitality space. He's a farmer and also an attorney. So let's start out with Dave. If you could give him sort of if you will, a sort of a tutorial, if you will. He's done some reading on it, but let's go through the basics of your program again.
Sure. So, as Blake would know, trying to find employees right now is a very difficult thing. Not only the hospitality industry, but all industries, but especially the hospitality industry where we're really struggling. And now coming into this summer season, tourist people coming in, we need staffing more than ever before so we can reopen. At the same time, pandemic restrictions are starting to lift, which is also causing us to need more employees, open up stores, hours expand. So, with not being able to get them, we looked and said, hey, how do we get people off unemployment? We're unfairly competing against the federal government with that extra stimulus of $300 that they're getting. So, you really can't get people to come back to work as easily as you would like. So, I decided to create a bill that's a real simple, basic, short term bill that's an opportunity and a job creator at the same time for people that are on unemployment. And the whole goal was to get somebody off of unemployment and moving forward in a career path or in a job position uh, for a longer period of time, not just a temporary job. So in this particular case, I created a bill that stated for every week that somebody goes back to work, whether it be at Luciano's Trattoria Romano or Gansett Wraps, and they go back to work full time, the state of Rhode Island would subsidize or back it up with an additional $150 check. So somebody making bare minimum wage would make 460 plus the 150. Those with higher skill sets, different positions, management, shift supervisory, advisory, or other positions of skill would make additional monies even greater than that. If this said employee maintained the job for at least 13 weeks, the state of Rhode Island would then kick in an additional 150 equal for those 13 weeks, which is a $1,950 check. So it was an incentive to say, hey, give up the federal money, come back to work, earn a little bit more by working, at a restaurant, hospitality, or a bar location, or any location. It's not just for us, but I'm talking about our industry. And the state of Rhode Island would be there to back that person up with a little extra money so they could do it. So by getting the $150 up front, worst case scenario, somebody be walking away with $610 a week. That's roughly around 15.25 an hour. Second, by getting the additional stimulus of 1950 on the end, it would bring that person up to an average of 760 a week, which is about $19 an hour. So it's a good helping hand to get somebody out of an unemployment situation and back out into the market, and off and running. At the same point, I did this for two 13-week segments. So you could join the first one and you're up and running. And then people who either had to wait for the pandemic to get their shots, or they really weren't ready, or the business they were going to join wasn't open yet, whatever the circumstances were, they could join the second one, which would then bring you all the way to the end of October, which helps us get through this summer tourist season and have our business be successful. Now, in talking with Matt Weldon, director of DLT, and Stefan Praya, secretary of commerce, about this on, I believe it was on Wednesday morning, they did present one little challenge, and that is that you can't use unemployment funds to back this up based on federal law, maybe state law too. So you have to find the funding source. Well, funding source could be stimulus money that's already been given to the state of Rhode Island, if there's some left, or you got $1 billion or whatever coming into the state, it could use that. At the same point, you're looking at spending about $1.5 million a week that the state would pay. We think we could get about 10,000 people easily back into the restaurant market, as quickly as next week if we had to. So if that's the case, the state would be spending about $1.5 million a week funding this particular program. By the time the program ended for the first segment of 13 weeks, the state would have spent about $39 million putting this together. Why do I think it's a good idea? A couple of reasons. One, if we put 10,000 people back to work in the restaurant market right away, which I think is pretty easy, might be 4 or 5 people on average per location. I myself can hire 30 full-time on Monday. It would generate at minimum $59 million of increased labor revenue to that workforce that rejoins the market. That 59 million of additional labor would generate about $6.8 million in overall labor related taxes back to the state of Rhode Island. So the state of Rhode Island spends 39 million up front, and they're getting roughly about a 17.5% return on their money in 13 weeks. Um, you know, they're not going to get it all back in 13 weeks, but we keep people employed. We get people off of the unemployment. Now you're not spending the money on the unemployment side, and you get 10,000 people or greater back to work. Without this, here are the problems we face. You got restaurants that can't open, like mine, Providence, which I have a contract with Joe Palino for 100 Westminster Street. We don't have anybody to staff it. We can't open it. We have other stores that we have minimal hours, and we can't expand them. We have restaurants all over the place, from Luciano's, Gansett Wraps, Cello's, Cafe Nuovo. We can keep naming them. Everybody has a staffing issue. Now, if we don't fix the staffing issue and get people off unemployment back to work, what happens next? Well, now we start closing stores, or now you start putting out bad service and people don't come back. Now we have lost revenue opportunity. So less sales tax that goes to the state, less 1% sales tax that goes to the individual towns and cities. So the accumulative effect of going backwards will continue to spiral out of control if we don't fix this right away. One more thing. I know there's been several things talked about at DLT, Commerce Department, and even at the press conference today about tying the $300 the Fed has now and keeping people on unemployment, but letting them go back to work a little bit longer or make a little bit more money on at their job so they can still keep the unemployment money that they're getting. That's not a wise idea. And I'll tell you why. All that does is tie someone back to unemployment. That ties an employee back to the federal government getting a handout. What I put together is truly a job creation opportunity to get somebody out in the workforce. You got 13 weeks of support. Take the training wheels off. You're up and running. To have an employee tied to unemployment and still collecting that federal money going on, that employee starts to look at, I can only work 20 hours. I can only work 30 hours. I'm working too much. I don't want to work Friday. I don't want to work the weekend. I want to take off and go to Block Island, not work at Block Island. That creates a problem with every single restaurant business that I talk to. There's not one person that supports that idea. It might sound good. It might sound easy, but it's not the right thing to do. This particular plan, I don't care how the state of Rhode Island gets the money. They got to find the money, and they need to enforce and put this plan immediately into effect so we can get people back to work. I drove by today over by Vonda in West Warwick, on Warwick there at the roadway where there's Cumberland Farms. Cumberland Farms, major organization, closed down. I believe there's another restaurant that I heard about today, Laura's Bar. I believe she had 2 locations, had to close one of the locations down, no staff. It's going to continue to multiply, especially with more and more people coming back or into the state and businesses taking more of that staff. If we don't get the people off unemployment, it's just simple mathematics. You're not going to be able to keep businesses open. You're not going to reopen some of them, and we're going to all suffer in either service, sales, or even being in existence in business in the future. And then that affects people working now. What happens if I close a Brita Wakings? You're going to put more people out of work. So that's the plan. It's simple. It's easy. It's actually too simple, but it's easy. Get somebody out, give them 13 weeks of support. That allows a person to get some training in a job. Do they like the job? Improve their skill set, negotiate higher pays and wages, take on different positions. And at the end of it, the state backs you up with another $1,950 check. It's awesome. It's $760 a week total at bare minimum if somebody's working full-time, obviously prorated if somebody does work part-time, but it's simple. But to tie unemployment or to tie the stimulus money that the Fed's putting now for somebody to go back to work all the way to September or October, however long they're going to run that for, is not the way to go. I know it sounds easy. They like to do it. The state of Rhode Island, in this case, has to step up. If they can spend $39 million and put 10,000 people minimum back to work, and that's a number I think that we could easily achieve in the restaurant hospitality field in the very near next few weeks, the return that they're going to get on money from that labor is awesome, and it helps restaurants survive, stay in business, and grow, and which is much needed in our economy.
Blake, in a real sense, again, as I mentioned in the onset, you're in the throes of this legislative session. You're dealing with this Green New Deal. You're dealing with voting issues. You're dealing with legalization of cannabis. You're dealing with the potential onset of this multi-billion-dollar money bomb that's about to hit the state. So in a real sense, you're juggling about 30 different balls in the air right now. But what's your initial response to this style of legislation?
It's interesting. It's government intervention in the marketplace has created this shortage of staff. And I like the notion of having government intervene in a way that David described, where they won't be taking away the workforce from businesses that need them. For instance, if unemployment wasn't available, Dave would have people knocking down his doors to work. But because government's intervening in the marketplace and having unemployment much higher than most people can pay, I think this makes sense to have government come in a way that saves businesses and gets our economy moving. Hopefully this is all going to be done by the fall. But right now, people are suffering, businesses are suffering, and I like this idea. I mean, I haven't heard the other side, right? My job is to hear all sides. But the numbers are kind of hard to argue with, especially when we have $1.9 billion of federal stimulus coming in. I don't know why we wouldn't spend $39 million of that to save the goose that lays the golden egg in this state, and that's our hospitality industry.
Right, and the sheer generation of additional taxes, you're talking about an additional 8% on taxes. You're talking about hotel taxes. You're talking about the myriad of taxes that are part of our everyday life here in the state. And I often talk, Blake, in terms of the multiplier effect. There is no other industry in this state, in my humble opinion, that creates wealth almost instantly in the communities with which they reside. Industries and businesses like Dave's are buying a lot of their supplies locally. And, we've had a significant farm-to-table movement here in the state over the last number of years. So you've got family farms that are intimately tied into the successes of these restaurants. And you've got, if you will, ocean-to-table now with folks like the folks in Matunic and other organizations that have invested significantly in aquaculture, which, again, break glass. People start showing up at restaurants. Restaurants stay open later. Everybody makes money. And it's organic. It's celebrating the notion that our most important business sector that we give lip service to all the time. I mean, how many times have we heard? What's the famous line? Small business is the backbone of the Rhode Island economy. And then, state government works to essentially eviscerate it, despite yours and a handful of others' heroic efforts. You're out on Block Island. You're intimately involved in the hospitality space. What are you seeing out there? Are you hearing similar complaints?
The same thing Dave described. No one can find staff.
And you've got also limitations on the presence of foreign staff, correct? I mean, particularly in Newport, where...
Yeah,
Go ahead, buddy.
Oh, sorry. Because of COVID, the H-2B and the J-1 visa program, which people usually use to supplement their domestic workforce, that's severely restricted this year. So it's kind of a double whammy.
Right. What is the process? And, the late, great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci used to refer to this as making the sausage. Blake, from your perspective, what is the process necessary to make this happen? And we'll remove the personalities for the time being and the quote-unquote politics in it. But from a sheer process perspective, what has to happen?
There needs to be energy behind this idea. And it's exactly what Dave and his group have been doing, is talking to the right people and getting on the air and explaining it. We in many respects, we're a reactive body, and there needs to be energy out there for this notion for it to move. I mean, there'll be a bill introduced. I understand they're going to be introduced in both houses. There's bills introduced in both houses all the time. There needs to be juice backing this. Do
you see yourself as someone, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but as someone taking this, the sports cliches aside, I apologize for them in advance, but if this is a bill that clearly that you can embrace and work with and mold and get this through.
So definitely, but I mean, the reality of our General Assembly is it's dominated by Democrats. They really rarely pass Republican bills unless they have to do with a hometown or something. So Dave has to get the ruling party on board. And I don't say ruling party in the pejorative, but they do have their hands on every lever of power. So we will work with him and advocate for him, but it's got to come from the Democratic Party. It just has to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The reality that I see this, if we don't get this on, then you're going to see restaurants just not open. You're going to see restaurants start to limit hours. I'm already hearing and talking to people. I mean, there's only so many hours that somebody that owns the restaurant can go in and work in the kitchen and still try to run the restaurant because he can't get people to work there. It's already happening. I mean, you're seeing places that are just limiting hours, shutting down, not opening up at all. It's not just me. I'm fortunate we got a bunch of stores. So, if we lose one, which we already lost one that's closed, if we have another one that gets shut down, it hurts, not major. But you got somebody that has one location, they lose it, they're done. You're not going to come back for that. I mean, never mind, it's going to hurt our entire economy too. So if this is not a bill that should be Republican or Democrat. This is a bill that's common sense. Every single restaurant you go to, they're not all Republican people. Everybody that eat there isn't a Republican person. They're just a Rhode Islander. We're all together. And supporting this is common sense. This helps everybody. Helps their neighborhoods. Helps their local communities. The sales tax, the 1% tax that comes back, all of that stuff. So to me, it should be a no-brainer.
There's not much common sense in politics. So
I know.
I agree with you 100%. In politics, frankly, common sense doesn't rule the day many times. And I'm not casting aspersions on my colleagues, but and I support the notion. But in order to get this across the finish line, my statement doesn't change. You have to convince the Democrats who run the chambers that it's the right idea. And I mean, your facts are good, but Pat was asking about the process, and frankly, that's the process, good or bad. That's just that's the way it is.
Dave, who is bring us up to date? Who is sponsoring it? And also, before we sign off on this, speak briefly to the prospects of it being also a job training opportunity for young people to, just because of the sheer volume of work, have an opportunity to learn skills in the hospitality business that at a very high level.
Yeah, so absolutely. So here's the process of what took place. I first proposed the idea to Speaker Joe Shikachi. He said, put a bill together that makes sense. I'll at least do what I can to get it on the floor, get it heard, or whatever that process is. So I did that last Friday, ended up giving it to him. I submitted it, or also gave it to Senator Frank Lombardi, who read it, said, wow, this is pretty cool. Let's jump on. He became the first sponsor. He sent it off to, everybody up there at the state level. Barbara Ann Fenton Fung decided to come back on as the House side sponsor. The majority leader liked it, said, all right, let's get this thing written, and married it, I guess, in both houses to be written and wrote. That took place, and now we actually have a bill in hand. And I thought today we'd have a bill number, but maybe it'd be tomorrow or whatever. So all that's in the works. And yes, this is not only an opportunity, not only a job creation bill, but it also allows someone to go and learn some real work skills in any business, not just the hospitality, although that's what we're talking about because that's what we're in, but it could be any business. So essentially you could have somebody hire a person for whatever skill set, wage rate they deserve or earn or negotiate. And then you get the state standing behind them saying, hey, we're going to give you some support for the next 13 weeks to really get up and running. And boom, there you go. You're off and running. Now you either stay in that job and moved up, or you're like, wow, that didn't really work out, but it gave me an opportunity to go to the next position or the next job. But at least you got off unemployment. And that's what my whole piece is. It's let's get people off unemployment and create real work opportunities for them right now. And this does it quickly, but it's not something that can take 2 or 3 months to do. Man, this bill's got to be heard. And by the end of this month, it should be passed and it should be up and running for next month at the latest. If not, then you're just going to see restaurants giving up and complaining and screaming and shouting because they can't survive. If you can't have people working, and we're at that. We're at points where we got days where we don't have enough people to staff. What do you do? We've been closing early. Warwick, my number one location, we had to close 2 hours early, 2 days. What's next? We've heard Dunkin' Donuts. We had Denny's is closing early. You got Starbucks closing down early. Restaurants going out of business or can't stay open. Just a matter of time. So I'll do my best to keep telling people. I'm trying to hit any talk show I can possibly get on. I'm on another one tomorrow morning. Pat's been great listening and opening up the airwaves for us and really promoting it and bringing attention to this at the different news conferences that are taking place. And believe me, I am pressuring every single person I talk to, and it doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat, male, female, doesn't matter. Every single person I bump into, every restaurant owner, they got to get out there and talk to their representatives. They got to call their senators and really promote and push this. And listen, it's just as important for the worker that's employed right now as it is for the guy that's unemployed. Because once you start closing down stores, you can't just relocate everybody to another location. And then you end up being a job killer just because we wanted to play politics. So this is one time. I really think that the governor should try to do what he can. Look at this or something like this and jump in and really push this thing through right away. There's no time left. Zero. It's got to be done.
Dave, listen, thanks again for popping in tonight. You've been, again, if I'll quote Buddy Cianci one last time, you have truly been attending the opening of an envelope over the last couple of the last week or so with this, but you're a hero for doing it. And I'm hoping, and I know this was a point I tried to make with the governor today, I am hoping that this sets the tone where stakeholders like yourself, people with incredible personal investments financially in the future of the state, are now given a seat at the table where it stops being this sort of top-down handful of people. If it's their idea, it's a good idea approach to particularly managing the business economy here. I can't stress that enough, that we're all partners in this mess we find ourselves in. It's going to take, here's the cliche, it's going to take teamwork to pull us all out of it. So, Dave, thanks again for joining us.
Pat, thank you. Representative Filippi, thank you very much. See you guys later. Have a great night.
Good to see you, Dave.
So, wow. So there we are on that. So, Representative Filippi, Speaker Filippi, if you will, thank you again for joining us. It's been way too long. You were one of the first folks to appear on this show years ago when you first made your entrance into Rhode Island politics. It's been a wild ride for the last few years, but let's get down to some analysis here. From your perspective, and again, you occupy a variety of spaces in the state, not just as a legislator, but as a business person, as a in the hospitality space, a farmer. If you were to give a report card right now on and adjusting, of course, if you will, curving the grade for the presence of COVID and the plague, what kind of report card would you give Rhode Island?
Oh, wow. C, maybe.
A gentleman's C?
What was it? Is it Rhode Island government? Is it the people of Rhode Island? There's a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what was one of the things? You'd get a grade and then the teacher would comment, right? And my comment would be not living up to his or her potential.
Absolutely. I'm... Both of you and I have lived in a lot of places. We're well traveled, I guess is the nice way of saying it. I can't really comment on another community, another state, another environment that has more unrealized potential in America than Rhode Island. Now, do you feel that's too strong a statement?
No, you're spot on. It could be so good. It could be so good here. And we just do the sucker bet all the time.
Let's take it step by step. There is an astonishing amount of legislation being posted at a time when our fundamental civil liberties have been abridged. How's that for a nice way of saying it? You touched on this at your press conference yesterday when we ran into each other again. What What's your perspective on this type of intense legislation in a period of time when citizen access to government is extremely limited?
It should not be happening. We should just be dealing with the pandemic, and that is it. We should not be affecting fundamental rights, and we should not be affecting the structures of our government, which we've been doing and just jamming things through. It's a problem. People can't get into their state house. They can't get their voices heard. They have 1 minute to call into committee hearings to voice their piece. It's not proper what we've been doing. We've got to meet. We've got to do our job. But given the constraints, we shouldn't be doing the revolutionary things that we are right now.
What are the worst? Well, again, it's been sort of astonishing sitting back and watching this as an outsider. What do you object to most? Is it the environmental legislation, voter rights, the budget? Just lead us through each, if you will, abomination.
So really the one that is the abomination that's sitting on the governor's desk right now is the 2021 Act on Climate. We call it the Rhode Island Green New Deal because that's what it is. The Green New Deal proposed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was just a resolution stating principles. We took those principles and put them in the law and delegated to the executive branch, unelected bureaucrats, the lawmaking power to meet targets which are just not meetable, emissions targets. And in order to reach these targets, they're coming after everything you do because there's no way they can even get close to reaching these targets without doing that. Your home, how you heat your home, what you drive, how your municipalities grow. And it's going to hurt poor people the most, frankly.
Governor McKee has maintained that because of the reasonableness, if you will, of his administration and his presence, that this extra legal body that's been created to administer our reaction governmentally and business-wise to the challenges, if you will, of global warming will be reasonable. Am I missing something here? Is Governor McKee going to be with us forever? Is he, in fact, governor for life? Or is there a possibility out there somewhere that at some point in the near future, we will, I don't know, elect somebody else? And their approach to this might not be so reasonable. Am I wrong there? What am I missing here, boss?
So there's really two problems with Governor McKee's analysis, and he's wrong on multiple levels. The first one is the analysis you just did. There's a gubernatorial election in 2022, one in 2026, one in 2030. The problem with this legislation is that no matter who your governor is, this legislation mandates that they come up with a plan to get us at 45% below 1990 emissions by 2030, 80% below by 2040, net zero by 2050. And if they don't come up with that plan with, quote, economy-wide enforceable mandates, if they don't come up with that plan, anyone off the street can sue them and force them with an injunction to come up with that plan. So even if there's a plan that's economically ruinous, will destroy this state, they have to publish that plan, even if they hate it. And then once they publish that plan, all bodies of state government have to enact regulations to carry that plan out, even if those bodies of state government hate it. So they've started something, they've started the wheels moving here, Pat, and there's no off-ramps, no matter who your governor is.
One of the things that folks who may have just met you in the last year or two, particularly in your rise to the House Minority Leader, may not realize is that you have a very strong background in constitutional law. You worked with the 10th Amendment Foundation. It was part of your experience at Rutgers Law. Does this exist anywhere else that you know of? Does this pass constitutional muster? A lot of us who are, armchair experts, as I like to say, I'm not an expert. I literally try to play one on the radio. We say to us, I can't possibly be constitutional. Is it? And is it happening somewhere else?
So Massachusetts has something similar. I believe Governor Baker signed a similar version into law last week. They had something like this, not as much of a delegation of legislative authority as this. So the constitutional question with this revolves around: can the legislature delegate away this power? And if they can delegate it away, did they do it specific enough? So our Constitution, Article 6, says that the legislative powers are in our General Assembly, our elected representatives. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of case law out there about when they can delegate that power away, that legislative authority. And all that case law has developed around the regulatory state, right? When you have regulations from the Department of Health, DEM, CRMC, they're essentially exercising a delegated legislative authority. Now, the problem with this delegation is that there are no Jersey barriers on it. It's undefined in scope. It can touch anything. So I think there's a substantial argument that this isn't lawful. This is not a lawful delegation because it's extremely broad. It basically delegates a legislative authority over everything having to do with emissions. That could be anything. And there's no speed bumps on it. There's no really walls saying that they have to operate within these lanes within that broad delegation. So I would think that once the governor is forced to come out with this plan and the state agencies are forced to enact this plan, and when they put the squeeze on somebody, that somebody is going to be suing and saying that this is an unlawful delegation. And I hope to hell they win.
Dan McKee is an intelligent man. He's been very successful in a variety of spheres of life. He was a successful mayor. He was my mayor. I always called him Mayor McCheese then, so I was the first one on that. But he ran a tight ship. When you see him in operation at a press conference today, it's clear he's in complete control of if you will, of the facts. But what's baffling to me, and I'm going to ask you to make a political judgment here, what's baffling to me is he is already developing a trait, from my personal perspective, of understanding the facts, simply choosing to ignore them on a variety of issues. Is this purely a political move, and damn the consequences, despite his, I believe, clearly understanding what the ramifications are? Is this just a way, as some people are saying, a way to somehow get past the progressives in the upcoming gubernatorial primary? What are your thoughts? What's his underlying motivation?
I haven't talked to him, right? I'm not in his head. If this is a political move, it's an abomination to throw the state under the bus in order to appease people who will probably never vote for him. I don't know if there's been phone calls from the National Party. This is something that I believe there's a strong national Democratic push to do. So I don't know where the pressure is coming from, but I believe Dan McKee is a smart man, a reasonable man, a small businessman, and nobody with that background could look at what this bill does and think it's a good thing. It's so bad that the proponents on the floor were just lying about what the bill does and doesn't do. Just lying during the floor debate because they cannot face the music about what they're doing here. It's cowardly. It is basically delegating our responsibility away to people who are being forced, because we mandate the targets that they have to meet, who are going to be forced to take all the oil heat out of homes. Our urban core, most of the poor people in our state heat with oil. They're going to have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to take that out and put electric heat in. And the representatives and senators know that no representative or senators would ever be able to vote for that. So they essentially put the hot potato in someone else's hands and prevent them from saying no. It is the height of political cowardice. And I've been up there for 7 years. This is absolutely the worst
piece of legislation that I have seen, and not just passed, but just seen introduced. I can't believe it's passed. And I can't believe Dan McKee is not going to veto it. It's disgraceful. The bill is disgraceful, and the people who are pushing this really need to take a look in the mirror.
When you say a significant point of order question, if you will, in terms of representing the nature of this bill, I'm trying to avoid the lie word for a second here. I'm supposed to be the host, but has been specifically the loss of control over one's principal asset in our world, if you will, in our society, and that, of course, is someone's home. Why are supporters of this legislation, why are they openly denying those basic, to me, undeniable facts? Is it just to put the squeeze on to get it through?
Yes. Yes, because they have to deny what this really does, because the heat would be, I mean, there's a reason they rushed it through, Pat, right? There's a reason they rushed it through in the session when no one can come in. No one knew about this. It was, blasted through the House Environment Committee on the floor 2 days later or 3 days later, like legislative days later. And the simple fact that they're misrepresenting and saying this only affects government. Only affects government. You have the sponsor saying that. You have the chairman of environment saying that on the floor, and they either don't know what the bill does, or they're being deliberately dishonest, maybe. But it's going to touch your home. There's no way we can meet the mandates, the greenhouse gas emission reduction mandates, without coming in your home. Impossible. Can't happen. You're an idiot if you think they can get 45% below 1990 levels by 2030 without touching your heating systems. 80% below 1990 by 2040 without touching your heating systems. It's not possible.
Right. And so where is it proposed that the money come from? And of course, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to segue into the money bomb that's on its way. Where do they propose that the money come from when you're looking at a state who right now, by some definitions, are looking at what's the George Carlin-esque term that they use right now? There's about 40% food insecurity, which is a really nice, clean, polite way of saying that there's people are malnourished right here, probably within walking distance of this studio. Who pays for all this?
They don't have an answer. Their answer is this is going to put us in the front of this technological wave, right? If there's a technological wave that makes this stuff efficient, people will install it. The market will take care of it. Trust me, if I could heat my house with electric cheaper than propane, I'd be doing it. And if I could drive an electric car around and it would be cheaper than my gas guzzling truck, I would do it. But they don't know where the money's going to come from. It's all theory to them. It's like, oh, the world's going to change. The world's going to change. I've been hearing for the past 30 years that we were at peak oil, that we were out of natural gas. It's done. But they're just, it's a religion, Pat. It's a religion.
Which, of course, brings us to the next religion that's celebrated here in Rhode Island, and that is living on the verge of a nervous breakdown, waiting for the next federal bailout. And, as someone who has openly contemplated, if you will, that time was running out, now we're going to get 1, 2, tree, as they say in the Cumberland tree, $4 billion. Who knows how many billions of dollars? When you and I chatted yesterday at the press conference, there was a moment when we looked at each other, and despite the fact that we've known about this now for a couple of weeks, there was this oblique moment when you contemplate the size, the fluidity, the composition of the trough that's being built right outside the State House right now. I am convinced that there will be a generational wealth transfer that takes place in Rhode Island for the pure benefit, if you will, of the ruling class. Blake, something I've, since we've last talked, I've sort of come to is the notion that the true 1% in America is not the investor class per se. The true 1% is, in fact, the government class. The government class is protected from all the exigencies and challenges of day-to-day life. They get their benefits. They're, as we've seen in Rhode Island now, for a year plus, despite economic tragedies taking place on a daily basis, their jobs, their lives, their paychecks, their benefits have been completely uninterrupted. All that's missing in Rhode Island, as far as I'm concerned, is the dollar stores and perhaps the really crappy Russian cars. Or, sorry, I think we'd be living, if you will, the Russian apparatchik dream with the DACA out somewhere in Foster, Gloucester. I don't even think I'm exaggerating. What's heading down the pike to us with these $2 or $3 billion?
Well, I mean, the $2 or $3 billion is going to be used to prop up our bloated government, to prop up all the bad decisions that have been made over the years, to give us an $11.8 billion budget. It's basically $11,800 for every man, woman, and child you see. That doesn't even include your local property taxes. And the government class is desperate to perpetuate that bloated system. And so all that money is going to go to their friends. It's going to go to their programs. And none of it is going to flow down to the people who are suffering the most. You're just going to have to deal with it. I think it's wrong. There needs to be real relief. Like this relief David Levesque was just talking about, right? It's $39 million to save thousands of restaurants. You think the government class wants to do this? I mean, we might be able to get it done if the pressure's real, but they've got other ideas for that $39 million. And it isn't Dave Levesque and the people who have sacrificed their lives and fortunes to do business in this state. It's not them.
What should the priorities be? Let's assume that there is a massive intervention of common sense, not unlike the one I think it was a few years back that I actually recently saw the tape where I described the need for an economics intervention, which was, and back then you could joke about these things, where we did a lockdown on the State House, and I handed out free copies of the Samuelson Eco 101 text. And the smirk, it was in front of House Judiciary, and your smirk at that time lit up the room. I think you had to put your head down because of the sheer utter stupidity of the statement. But if Blake Filippi is in charge tomorrow, what do we spend that money on, from your perspective?
Clearly, a lot of it is tax relief. The people need money. They need to stop paying taxes. And then if government is to spend any of that money, it's on capital projects. It's not perpetuating bloated government. It's I think you had mentioned the tobacco settlement money, right? Mm-hmm. All that money came in here, and instead of doing capital projects or taking care of people who were sick because of smoking, we just grew government and grew government. And guess what happened once the tobacco money ran out? We didn't shrink government. We taxed more. I'm still waiting for the sales tax to go back down to 6% because of DEPCO.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there you go. Wow.
Right, remember that? It was like, sales tax was 1% just to bail out the banks, bail out the credit unions. And once it's over, we're going to reduce it. That was 1980s.
And my understanding is are we actually still paying debt service on the tobacco tax settlement, which we bonded out, incredibly enough?
Yeah, we bonded it out. Yeah, I think we are. I think we are.
It's a moment. It's at moments like this that I look to one of my own personal philosophers for comments, and what he would say right now is, "What a bunch of maroons." Bugs usually rules overall. So, tax relief first. Now, cleverly, it appears that the federal government may have actually preempted us by saying that a big chunk of this cannot be used to lower taxes. At the same time, I don't believe we can use it for the real desire, which is to bail out the pension funds, because the only threat to the 1% to the government ruling class is in fact the sustenance of their precious, and I'll spare you the Gollum analogies, but they're precious pensions. I remember Gina slipping once during one of her pressers, COVID pressers, when she talked about the importance of maintaining, if you will, needed health benefits, needed security for the government class because they were working overtime. It was at moments like that I asked her about shared sacrifice. And clearly I'm the least person ever to be, that ever to be called a collectivist. But to me, it was a little bit of irony involved. And I continually would ask her about the notion of shared sacrifice. That, in fact, by her own estimation, by the philosophy that she came from or emerged from, that society is judged based on the collective and the collective ability to engage in said sacrifice for the quote-unquote greater good. Have you seen any shared sacrifice at all by the dreaded government sector?
No.
0.0.
No, I haven't.
You're thinking hard. You're trying, aren't you?
I am. And listen, you can't bash them all, right? There's some people who do really good work. Like, for instance, the DLT when everything went to hell last year, we're going crazy, helping people out, trying to get them on unemployment. It's like you can't say that there aren't people out there who do their job and do it well, but the people have been suffering. And I haven't seen that from our government.
Right. Which leads me to the next question. And this is possibly, it appears to be, with the McKee administration, the hot potato, the source of controversy. From your perspective, and to a certain degree, this is Monday morning quarterbacking. This is, we're looking in the rearview mirror here. But from your perspective, the government shutdown, the 15-day flattening of the curve, which I believe we just celebrated the 13th month anniversary of. In retrospect, was it appropriate to have the type of thorough shutdown of the private economy in the manner in which it took place?
I'll start at the end. The manner in which it took place was frankly outrageous, right? The first 2 weeks, the first month, I get it. I was scared. I thought it was the 1918 flu. Mm-hmm. We didn't know what this thing was. It was smart to do what we did. But then they perpetuated this system of executive fiat, rule by executive control, staying in a state of emergency for 13 months, and a General Assembly that absolutely abandoned its responsibility when it was needed most. I'm embarrassed as a legislator for what we did during 2020. Has it gotten better in 2021? Yes. But that's too late. It was an embarrassment, and the people should be ashamed of their representatives for what happened during 2020.
Is there any restoration of oversight taking place from your perspective at all?
Minor. There's a task force that is looking at the vaccine, making sure that they're getting the vaccine out. And, that's one aspect of this state of emergency. I feel foolish even calling it that because I don't believe it's a state of emergency anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. There's no real oversight. There isn't any real oversight. If there was real oversight, we'd have an answer to your question, Pat, as what is the end? What is the goal? When does this end? The fact that the people pulling the strings can't tell us that, it should scare the hell out of everybody.
Right. I'll send it to you. I don't know if you had a chance to see it floating around. There's a 1 minute and 7 second video of Liz Tanner, who's by the way, you talk about the quiet powers behind the thrones, if you will. She's the head of the Department of Business Regulation. And when asked in a kind of an off-guard moment on a Zoom meeting that she sat in with Mr. Silva and the gentleman, De Silva, who is the mayor of East Providence, and folks, it's out there on the coalition social media. When asked about whether or not someone would have to mask if, in fact, all parties involved were, in fact, received both inoculations, and you have to see the video to understand the tone of her voice, the dismissive nature, the autocratic, authoritarian, and I always get this wrong, but if it may please the crown, moment where, of course you do, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. And I don't. It was this rare moment of honesty when she was probably, not glancing at the official talking points du jour, and let the cat out of the bag. That you're right, this isn't changing. But when you look at from an oversight perspective, let's talk about the convention center. I had the opportunity at one of the press events to query the head of the Department of Health about the overall cost of the field hospitals. Astonishingly, and I even mentioned at the time I was just looking for a ballpark. I wasn't asking for a general ledger breakdown. Astonishingly, she had no idea. It was one of those moments where they kind of all stared at each other blankly, and I realized that there was absolutely no management skills at work. I'm not sure what we're going to find when and if true oversight happens, or if this is going to be another one of those examples where we, let's just get this behind us moments. But astonishingly enough, we appear to have spent in excess of $31 million on field hospitals, including millions spent at the convention center. Now, again, I'm going to put you on the spot because that's what you and I seem to have fun doing to each other. But, how much of that, and if you don't know, that's fine, because I'm coming from left field on this, but it would be fun to find out, to get a real handle on how much of that money, which was federal money that was destined ultimately for small businesses, was simply a temporary bailout of the convention center, which has hemorrhaged cash since the day they broke ground on it. And it has never made money, has never come close to making money, and has never realized its mission at any level. Is that a fair assessment?
Completely fair assessment. Mind you that in normal years, we subsidize the Convention Center Authority $20 million a year. And that's to pay their bonds. So if we didn't open up a field hospital there, we'd probably have to appropriate $40 million. Who knows how much we would have to give them so they can make their debt payments. So essentially, this federal money came in and we put it in one pocket so it didn't have to come out of the state pocket. Listen, we've for a long time said the Convention Center Authority needs to change, given what was going on, and that if the Convention Center Authority didn't open, we would have to bail it out anyways. I didn't mind the federal money going to them because that just prevented state money having to go fill the gap. As crazy as that is,
right? That's
the fact.
But in the event of and I had the opportunity to ask Governor Raimondo this little ditty. It's my contention that if we had sold the Providence Convention Center Authority in totality 3 to 4 years ago, near the peak of the market, when there was at least some market for the private use of those buildings, that we would be one whole hell of a lot better off. Is it even possible with this crew to just suggest, for laughs, I should suppose, the divestment of state property in light of what's going to happen once we, I'm sorry if I used the vernacular, my family's from Brooklyn, piss through the $2 or $3 billion that we're going to get? I mean, is there any appetite for that whatsoever at any level, at any place? And I'm referencing the kind of very honest cynicism that you expressed when we had this conversation just a few short minutes ago with Dave. Is there any appetite for that at any level whatsoever?
No, there isn't. That Convention Center Authority, it's a gravy train. It's basically, there's a lot of people who are connected who get their buddies' jobs there. If you remember the story with Nick Mattiello's friend Demers,
right?
That was just a job that was given out to a buddy. And there's a lot of people who are connected who work there, and government doesn't want to shrink. And maybe it'll happen, but it'll only happen if we have to, not because it makes sense. If the state comes to a point where there's a solvency issue, we would have to shed state property. And that's something we probably should be thinking about. I think we should be looking at liquidating a lot of state assets, rolling them into our pension fund, and then converting our pension fund into a type of 401k, divesting of being in the pension business. give the pensioners a bunch of money, have some type of calculation to figure out how much of that fund they own, hand it to them and say, good luck. That's what's happening in the private sector. The pension fund, let's be honest, and mostly our municipal pension funds are even worse. There really are millstones around the state and our municipalities. And it's something that was very 20th century. And people are going to be upset if they hear this, but it can't keep going on. It can't keep going on. And eventually it's going to be like Central Falls was.
Right.
In Central Falls, those pensioners, I think, took over a 50% cut. I don't want that to happen. I would rather give people money, empower them to take care of their own lives. And that's what we should be doing. Liquidate state assets, give that money to our pensioners, divest ourselves of these 2 millstones around our neck. You know, these fiefdoms that have been built with state property, get rid of it, and give our pensioners something that they can go live their own lives without being reliant upon us, because we can't do it forever.
You know, there was an individual a few years back, I think it was about 12, 13, 14 years ago, maybe right around that time, who used to quote that it was about the math. And I think she became treasurer. And she talked quite earnestly that, in fact, that from a mathematical perspective, to your point, that this simply couldn't continue. Ultimately, she didn't take pension reform far enough. A few of us predicted at the time. I think we had a conversation a couple of years after that hadn't gone far enough. And now, even with record market indices, which, by the way, are hyperinflated because of our currency supply. That's another show you and I should have sometime. But even with that, we are still facing near collapse. So I guess the philosophical question I want to ask you, and by the way, I'm grateful for the amount of time you're spending with us tonight. The philosophical question that I want to ask in sort of bringing this to a close for tonight, this pension money, again, is just another act of incredible Rhode Island fiscal brinksmanship. How long, I mean, if you're a betting man, number one, and I'll use a college analogy. Remember, we all had that big test and final exam in December, and we weren't ready, and all of a sudden it snowed that day, and it was a snow day, and they moved off the test a day or two. Are we going to take those couple of days and study harder, or are we going to grab a 6-pack, and are we going to go grab a couple of trays from the cafeteria, and are we going to go snowboarding for a day or two and then wake up to the reality that, oops, we could have been studying? It's a silly analogy, but I think it's pretty compelling. What happens, and how long do you think the state of Rhode Island can milk this one?
I don't know. I don't know. A lot depends on what they do nationally, right? If they keep inflating the money supply and blowing the cash all over the place, things may perpetuate, but you're going to be spending $100 for that 6-pack. Like, I don't know how, economics is math. I don't know how it continues absent a massive inflation and federal bailouts. And that massive inflation is going to hurt the pensioners, right?
Right.
You're going to get your, let's say, $2,000 a month, and it's $1,000 to buy something that's $100 today. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, what I see in the state and I see nationally is I don't see fiscal discipline. And the only way I think to get out of this the right way is through fiscal discipline. And I don't see any of that. So which way does the fiscal lack of discipline go? I don't know. But I don't think it can end well unless there is fiscal sanity. And we just don't have that.
No. And there appears to be, once again, no compelling reason in their estimation to do so. And it's staggering when you look at the confluence, if you will, of the legislation that's been passed this week with the fiscal responsibilities and the fiscal realities we're about to face. I don't know. I don't think this movie ends well. I just don't. But any thoughts in terms? Any thoughts going into this next creative legislation. What's as we sort of close out for the night, and I want to invite you back and have you on. It's sort of an open door. We broadcast. We as an organization now, we're on the air 4 to 5 nights a week, 2 to 3 hours a night with programming, hoping to grow that and specifically afford thought leaders like yourself an opportunity, a forum, a platform where you can engage in a long-form conversation like this. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, particularly in the year 2021, because we all have that sort of short-term attention span theater going on with politics. We want everything nice and neat. But as you can tell in the conversation tonight, there is nothing that's nice and neat, and it's not about to get nice and neat. But what are you facing? What's next up in legislative whack-a-mole, a.k.a. Halitosis Hall, a.k.a. Mortar, a.k.a. the Rhode Island General Assembly?
They're coming for the charter schools, and they're coming for your right to defend yourself, your family, and your communities.
Mm-hmm. Oi.
Yeah.
Anyone miss Nick Mattiello yet? Just thought I'd throw that out there. You don't have to respond to that. The charter schools, I whip out little hashtags like end public education, and of course the collective audience loses their mind on me, because who will then enforce standards? Who will look to the educational possibilities for particularly as what we call now BIPOC, people of color? Who will ensure that there's equity in the school system? And of course, anyone with a conscience and who's paying attention points out that none of that exists now. And your reaction to this statement, I don't think, even in a libertarian paradise that my mind sometimes goes to when I need a happy place, right? Which will be in about 5 minutes. I posit that even if my solution, which of course is not even charter schools, I'm beyond that, as you can imagine. I just believe in complete private education. Even if private education as a replacement for public schools in Providence, Rhode Island, and a great part of Rhode Island, were an absolute failure, I don't think it's possible on any level, whether it be humanity, education, civil rights, I don't think it's possible to be worse at any level with any solution to any idea than what exists right now. What's your reaction to that?
It's a civil rights issue of our time, and we're massively failing our children. Martin Luther King says, what does it profit someone to be able to sit at an integrated lunch counter if he can't afford a hamburger? Economic opportunity is necessary to enjoy the fruits of legal equality. Mm-hmm. And in order to have economic opportunity, you need a good education. And we are denying generations of children the futures that they deserve as citizens of this country. It's cowardly. We've let them down, and no one's doing anything about it. The state's been running the Providence school system for a year and a half now. What changes have you seen? What, they're arguing over a contract?
Right.
They took over the Central Falls School District 20 years ago. It's one of the lowest performing school districts in the state. It's a civil rights issue, and we are failing. And it's mostly minorities who are losing their futures because of it.
Right. And finally, as you pointed out, the right to bear arms, the right to engage in one's self-defense, which I will point out to you, I'm post-constitutional. It is a natural right. Folks like Brenda Jacob and Jen Moffitt and all those folks at the Yellow Shirt Brigade and too many people to name have done an astonishing job over the last 5 to 10 years, sort of holding the barbarians at the gate. Does the Senate version of this provoke a resurgence of the attempt to pass the bills that were put on, if you will, on vacation for further review, as we used to say? Or are they still hell-bent to continue their jihad on that most basic civil right?
If we learned anything from the past 2 weeks with the Green New Deal, is that these people are going big. They're not waiting. They're not nibbling around the edges. They're going for the whole cookie.
There you go. Blake Filippi, thank you so very much for joining us. I know this ran a little bit long. I appreciate you spending time with Dave and sort of having a little kumbaya moment over an attempt here by an individual businessman and a group of business people to resurrect and save, if you will, as you pointed out so aptly, the golden goose. And again, I appreciate and I'm grateful for the work that you do. It continues to be, there's a level of nobility attached to it in a organization that is so thoroughly failed, so thoroughly amoral, so thoroughly absent in any sense of responsibility to the very people who depend on it, that to even maintain any sense of decency is truly laudatory. So I appreciate your effort, and I'm certainly grateful again for you having spent time with us tonight.
Thank you, Pat. It's good to see you.
Well, again, open door, buddy. Just we've got a facility here that speaks to civil rights and speaks to civil liberties. We have people who, from both sides of the political aisle of goodwill, coming here to fight those fights. And very often we call it the coalition because there is overlap. There are good people on both sides. The trouble is there's not apparently enough of them. And that's something we will all work on together. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Folks, we've decided to throw our name in the hat with everybody else, it seems like, in Rhode Island on that whole Rhode Island Monthly thing. So if you're voting on it and you want to stir up some stuff, vote for the Coalition Radio Network for best news blog. Imagine if we had if a small government, libertarian oriented, civil rights related, personal respect demanding, body autonomy respecting organization actually placed somewhere here in Rhode Island. So have some fun with it. Folks, we will be on the air again tomorrow night, hosting some national libertarian shows. But we thank you for joining us this evening. This marks the end of tonight's broadcast. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you soon.